Hey there, parents. Thank you for joining us for BRHTX this week. We're looking forward to giving you some parenting tools that you can use to help raise children who can make their faith their own. My name is Jeff Hyatt. I'm a pastor at Second Baptist at the South Campus. I've been married for 33 wonderful years. But the thing that's pertinent for today is I have two daughters, Kelsey, who's 31, and Caitlin, who's 29. Kelsey is actually on staff at a church over in the San Antonio area, and my daughter works as a social worker, helping people whose families have a loved one transitioning to the next life. And so today we're looking forward to talking with you about how you can help your children make their faith their own. And I have a couple friends with me today, and I want you to meet them, and they can tell you a little bit about their children. So Mary, why don't you go ahead?
So my name's Mary Robertson. I have a husband who I've been married to for 17 amazing years. I have three children. Okay, get ready. My oldest is Faith. She's 18. My middle is Blake. He's 17. And then Christian is 16 years old. So two of them are graduating this year. And our youngest is going to be a junior in high school.
You do not look old enough to have a 16, 17, and 18-year-old. All right, well, we're glad you're here, Mary. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Danielle Menard. I've been married to my husband, Joel, for 27 years last week. We have three kids, Jacob, who is 25, Cassidy, who is 22, and Lauren, who is 20. Lauren's junior in college, Cassidy just graduated college, and Jacob is doing a trade school up in Colorado right now.
Awesome. I actually know Cassidy. She was an intern at South last summer, and our staff loved having her on our staff for that summer. Let's start off with this. Knowing and recognizing that we're products of our parents, the upbringing that we received, what's something that your parents did when you were a child that maybe helped you to make your faith your own? Who wants to start?
I can go. I honestly didn't grow up from a Christian home. Neither one of my parents really thought going to church was important, but I always had this feeling inside me that something was missing, and so I knew that that was something important that I needed to do. But one thing that I noticed about my parents is they were hard workers. They were super humble. They just always put others first, and I think through that and with my walk with the Lord, it's been a way that I can just help raise my children the right way.
It's interesting you would say that because my parents were kind of the same way. We went to church, and they were good people, but I don't know if I would say they were very spiritual. But the things I picked up on were serving others. My dad was the guy that would go to the widow's house, and we would fix her furnace together. My dad was the custodian for the church, and I remember that they would pay him $50 a week to clean the church, and he'd make my brother and I go with him. And we wondered what our cut was of that $50. And he said, I'll never forget, he said, well, boys, sometimes you just do things because you love God. Yeah. And every week he would take that check he would give and he'd put it in the offering plate. And those are the kind of things that always stuck with me, just hard work, serving others, giving. What about you, Danielle? What do you remember?
Yeah, my parents were divorced when I was quite young. We grew up here in Houston with my mom, single mom, my sister and I. My dad lived quite far away, but both sets of my parents, faith was always very important. My mom didn't grow up with parents that believed, and so she was very adamant about making sure that that was a part of our life. My dad became a Christian at a late age, even though his parents were Christians. But same kind of thing. Service was always very important. My mom worked full-time job, and then we were always involved in stuff at the church. She was volunteering as leading and mentoring. So that was the example that they set for us.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We got parents out there. Some have babies. Some have 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. What are some pieces of advice? Let's start with smaller children. What would be some advice that you would give to a parent who has, kids in the, 3 to 12 range, kind of that child range? What are some things that you did as a parent to help raise children who were able to make their faith their own?
For us, church was always a non-negotiable. That was every Sunday we were at church. Every Wednesday we were at church. And I think it was really one of those things that it's where you're just building in those practices and those foundations. And, praying before our meals, we would constantly make sure that, we would pray before we would eat. If we would see an accident on the side of the road, we would stop and we would pray for those people. And so honestly, just staying grounded with your faith and making sure that you're leading by example.
What about you, Danielle? What was your church experience? Was church a big deal for them to make sure you were in church? And did you make your kids go to church?
Yes, it was a big deal for my mom, especially because we were here. We didn't have family, we didn't have anything, so the church really became our church family. That was our family here in Houston. We had family out of town, out of different states, and that was really important to us. When my kids, they grew up in the church. We've been at Second their entire lives. It was very intentional for my husband and I to be involved in what they were involved in the church, and to make connections with their youth pastor, with other people that were Christians that were mentoring them, so that even if there was something they didn't feel comfortable coming to us for, they had those Christian strong role models and people that were approachable to them within the church that they could go to and ask for advice, talk to them about the issue and figure out how to approach us with us. And that happened actually on more than one occasion. So for us, that's how it worked out best.
And it's interesting that the three of us, we all have older kids, and they've all grown up to have their own faith, to make their faith their own. And one of the common denominators for us is that, church was a priority. I grew up, in the old days, because I'm the old one up here, we had church Sunday morning, church Sunday night, church Wednesday night. And, as a former high school pastor, I would run into parents who would say, well, I don't want to make my kid come to church. I don't want them to grow up hating the church when they turn 18. And I'm always like, but you need to have them connected to a church, to someone other than you. And I know my philosophy was, I'd rather them walk away from their faith at 18 than to say I didn't do everything I could as a parent between 12 and 18 for them to grow in their faith. So obviously, being a part of a church is a key piece of advice. What other advice would you give? Let's move on to middle school and high school. Knowing that we have parents out there who, obviously, this is BRHTX, and so we've got some parents who are watching who have students. What kind of things would you do as a parent during those years so that your kids could grow to own their faith? Because ultimately, that's the goal. You want them to graduate from high school, go off to college, that they have a firm grasp of their faith. And so what was maybe a couple things maybe that you did during those days to help them to grow in their faith? Go ahead, Danielle.
Well, like I said before, trying to find a good connection with people at church. And sometimes that can be a challenge for kids to make new friends. But really trying to reach out to the youth staff and trying to be involved in things. One of the great things that the youth ministry has done is invite kids to be involved in, every aspect of life, setting out the chairs, doing audio-visual, being part of the band, doing welcoming, trying to find some way to get them involved. So it's not just going to church and sitting and soaking, but it's about participating. And sometimes, they have a lull in their faith. Their friends are a bigger influence than you are. Their friends are a bigger influence than their church. Having a responsibility, having expectations, having people looking for them and missing them if they're not there, it can be really impactful in motivating them to be at church.
That's a great word. Let me jump in there real quick on that. Kind of backtracking a little bit, when Lori and I, when our kids were, in that 4th through 8th grade range, one of the things that we were very dogmatic about was the friends that our kids hung out with. Because we knew that their friends would be probably a greater influence a lot of times than what we were. And so we wanted to make sure we knew what kind of people were they hanging around with. We took a room in our house when they were in junior high, and we kind of made it a little junior high hangout room. And we had the video games, and we painted it a different thing. We had movies posters around because honestly, we wanted our kids to invite their friends to our house. We wanted our house to be the place that all the kids wanted to come to. Like, hey, let's go to the Hyatts. I know they're going to pay for the pizza. They're going to provide ice cream, or they're going to have all kinds of video games for us to play because we wanted our kids to bring their friends to our house. And it was really awkward because, and Lori was especially great at it, that if my kids were coming to someone else's house, to call that parent and to say, hey, Kelsey or Caitlin's coming to your house, and can you tell me a little bit about what they're going to be doing? And, is there access to alcohol in your house? Are you going to be there? Is there going to be a chaperone? We were very protective about the people that our kids hung around with. Mary, what about you?
So for me, I think in the middle school and high school years is really when you are starting to allow your child to become their own. I think that's when you're still involved as much as you can. We still made sure that, my goodness, there were many nights where my husband and I were high-fiving outside the door, like, okay, I'm going here and you're going here, because with 3 kids, there's only 2 of us, but to make sure that we were at everything. And we wanted to be there to support them, but we wanted to know who their friends were. We wanted to know who their friends' parents were. But also just getting to that point where your children needed to make their own mistakes. And I think being so involved in what they were doing, we could do that, at different times. And I think that's really important.
And that's one of the hardest things, isn't it?
Oh, my goodness.
Letting your kids learn from their mistakes and not coming rushing in and fixing whatever the problem is. Because as a parent, you want to rescue them. You want to make everything right. But at the same time, you also recognize there are times when, well, you know what? You decided to make this choice, and now you have to pay the consequences for that. There are consequences for what you did. I know for Lori and I, and you kind of touched on it, Danielle, a little bit, the idea that when they get into middle school and those high school years, I think it's critically important for your child to learn to serve, to actually put their faith into action. Because by the time they're in 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, they've heard the story of David and Goliath thousands of times. At that point, at that age, they need to start living it out. They've heard the story of Peter walking on the water. Now they need to actually get out of the boat and do something that's a little bit risky, that challenges them spiritually. And so we always had our kids, doing things with us where they could serve others. We were fortunate. My wife worked at a place called Mission Northeast, and they would, help needy families in the Porter, New Caney area. And we would take our kids to Mission Northeast, and we would have them walk with other children as they picked out a Christmas present for their parents. And so they saw firsthand. We would go many Thanksgivings. We would take our family and we would go to some homeless shelter on Thanksgiving Day, and we would serve Thanksgiving meals. And my kids were right there and right up to their elbows in homeless people. And they were the ones taking food to tables and picking up trash and those kind of things. One of the things that I did that I think was very positive is I took both of my girls on a mission trip. We made sure that we lived in Kingwood, the bubble, the forest, and they don't recognize that there are people that are hurting and needy. And so I took Kelsey on a mission trip when she was in high school to Mexico. And I remember walking around these villages and her asking, "What is that over there?" And I'm like, "Well, that's where they go to the bathroom. That's their kitchen. And she was like, "Oh my goodness, I had no idea." Caitlin, I took on a mission trip to El Salvador with living water. And those memories I have of my children, my girls, ministering to people and serving others makes a big difference in their lives. I do want to hit on this. We got other questions here, but I do want to hit on this. Knowing that we're going to have parents who are watching this who have done all they can, but for whatever reason, their child has not embraced their faith. Their child has not grasped onto the things of God and don't have a hunger for God at this time. Do you have any words of advice you would give that person today?
Yeah, I think for a parent who, that's their story right now, I think that's where we have to understand that our children ultimately are not our own. Our children are the Lord's. And, He has entrusted us with them to take care of them and to plant those seeds. And even though we may not see that right now, just like in Proverbs where it says, train a child up in the way that he shall go, I live by that verse with my children. And I just know that I'm trying my very best. But ultimately, me, Mary, my husband, Blake, we can't do it on our own. That's where we have to rely on the Lord. And that's where we are failing as parents. And I've failed so many times. I've had to go back and apologize so many
my
times.
My kids overcame my parenting. They were able to succeed in spite of me.
Yes.
And so I know exactly what you're talking about.
But the beauty of it is we're not going to be perfect.
Exactly.
We're not going to be a perfect parent. That's where the Lord comes in and He fills that gap. And you just really, really have to trust Him and know that, right now it's about planting those seeds. It's about those, biblical practices and the foundation.
And that's the problem with these panel-like things. People think, oh, well, they're the experts in raising kids. They've never made a mistake. If they only knew how many times I had to go to one of my girls and say, Kelsey, I was angry and I yelled and I should not have yelled. Kelsey, Caitlin, I expected too much from you. As parents, we're a work in progress. And so God is still able to use us in spite of our weaknesses. What about you, Danielle? For that parent who has a kid who's struggling right now spiritually?
Actually, that is my story right now. Our oldest son, who was raised in the church and has kind of made a decision that that's not a priority to him. And as a mom that's been involved in the church, sometimes that's really hard to hear. That was really hard for my husband and I to digest. However, it happened at an age that my son is an adult. And a couple of things had to happen. One, my husband and I had to decide that his relationship with God was not a reflection of us. It's not for good or for bad. This is his choice. But the second thing of that is it called my husband and I, and this is what we felt for this particular child in this particular situation. It caused my husband and I to say, now we are going to live out our faith in a way that is hard for us because our kid does not agree with us. His decisions don't line up with the decision that we would make. And so we had to, and we still had to be very intentional about loving him and being inclusive in the family and not making that the issue. Because when that becomes the issue, and you're fighting and you're forcing about that, I think about the prodigal son, the dad could have chained the son to the bed and said, you're not going. You're not leaving. And that would not have served that purpose. It would have caused strife in the family. It would have been brokenness. And so my husband and I had to decide that we were going to say, you know what? We love you. And that verse you were talking about, that when they're old, they won't depart for that. Sometimes that line, I don't feel like that's a straight line. Adulting, the path to adulting is different for every child. And sometimes they got to figure things out for themselves. And I don't know the end of my child's story. I don't know what's coming. But I know that my husband and I are firm in our faith. He knows that we love them. He knows that we love God. We pray for him. We pray with him. He comes to church with us on the obligatory holidays. But that's something that we've had to live out. And as a mom, it's kind of hard. But there's hope.
Well,
there's hope.
Parenting is hard.
Yes,
There's nothing easy about parenting.
Absolutely.
We've always thought of, I think you mentioned it earlier, Mary, that we were stewards of these children that God had blessed us with. We had 18 years. And unfortunately, our thoughts were, let's do everything we can to try to feed them spiritually, to put them in a position to grow spiritually, to get them to where they can accept their faith, make their faith their own. And we've always said, 18 years in one day, if they choose to walk away, my heart would be broken. I'd be so disappointed. But we were like, but it's not us. We did everything we can. And so parents, I would encourage you, during these years, do everything you can, whatever it takes. Here's the thing. we'll close with this. You know, in my life, I've been able to do a lot of great things, but there is nothing in my life that brings me more pride than to know my girls love Jesus. I mean, there's nothing in my life, and I've got to do mission trips and beach retreats and speak at different things. And but when you have parents, when you have a 29-year-old and a 31-year-old who are passionate, devoted followers of Christ, you're like, I don't need anything else. I feel like I've been a success in my life simply because of the fact that God has blessed us. And we pray the same thing for you. We know that parenting is difficult, but your job, your assignment is that God has given you these little things of clay to mold into shape while they're under your roof. And it's our prayer that God will use you to help them to make their faith their own. Thanks for joining us. We're so glad that you are with us. Make sure to tune in tonight at 7 p.m. For BRHTX worship. You can get the link there at second.org. And then tonight at 8 o'clock, there's going to be a special parent Zoom gathering where you can ask questions, get some more practical advice. Some of our staff will be hosting that. I know they'd love to help answer any questions that you have. You can get that link also at second.org. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Danielle.
Thank you.
And you have a great day. Thanks for being with us.